Power often comes at a steep cost, and one of the most profound prices is loneliness. As you rise to the top, the distance between you and others grows, not because you're surrounded by fewer people, but because fewer can truly understand the burdens you carry. This isolation isn't just about being alone physically, it's the emotional distance that power creates, forcing leaders to make decisions without the comfort of empathy or support from those around them. Leaders like Napoleon Bonaparte and Steve Jobs illustrate this, with their brilliant minds often clouded by the solitude that comes with their authority. The psychology of power: why fear lasts longer than love. At its core, the human desire for leadership and power has been fundamentally tied to kindness, love, and approval. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to be liked, to please others, and to seek affection. This idea is deeply embedded in our society and reinforced through countless messages from family, teachers, friends, and even media. We are taught that by being the good person, the one who is friendly, generous, and supportive, we will naturally rise to positions of respect and authority. However, there is a disturbing reality that Niccolo Machiavelli understood well, a truth that modern society is often reluctant to acknowledge. Kindness and approval alone do not build lasting power. In fact, they can make us vulnerable. The more we bend over backward to please others, the more we expose our weaknesses. Machiavelli, in his famous work, The Prince, argues that fear, not love, forms the true foundation of power. Let me explain why fear is a far more effective tool for leadership than kindness or popularity. The true nature of power: fear versus love. The psychology behind this is rooted in our evolutionary survival mechanisms. In the early days of humanity, survival depended on clear hierarchies and dominance. The animals that ruled the environment were not always the ones that were liked, but rather those who commanded respect and fear. Those who were feared were rarely challenged because people understood the consequences of defying them. Modern psychological studies also support Machiavelli's view. Research by Stanley Milgram, one of the most famous psychological experiments, revealed that obedience to authority can make people perform actions that go against their moral compass. His Milgram experiment showed that when authority figures were present, participants were more likely to follow orders, even when it meant causing harm to another person. The people who complied were not necessarily bad individuals. They were simply influenced by the fear of consequences from a respected authority. In essence, fear creates compliance. When people fear the consequences of their actions, they tend to comply with authority. They respect the boundaries set by the powerful, even if they don't like them. In essence, fear creates compliance. When people fear the consequences of their actions, they tend to comply with authority. They respect the boundaries set by the powerful, even if they don't like them. Kindness versus weakness: the hidden danger of being nice. But why does excessive kindness or the constant desire to please others undermine power? The answer lies in the fact that kindness can be seen as a weakness. People are often drawn to kindness, but when someone is overly accommodating, they become vulnerable. Kindness, without clear boundaries, creates a power vacuum. Others feel free to take advantage of you. In the eyes of many, kindness is simply an invitation to manipulate, because generosity without limits is often interpreted as a lack of authority. Consider the saga of King Louis XVI of France. His reputation for kindness, generosity, and tolerance ultimately contributed to his downfall. His inability to establish authority or take firm actions when necessary led to widespread discontent and betrayal by those closest to him. The French Revolution, which led to his execution, was in part a reaction to the perception of weakness in his leadership. He was loved by the people, but that love did not translate into respect for his authority. On the other hand, leaders like Napoleon Bonaparte understood the importance of fear in maintaining control. While Napoleon was known for his military genius, he also used his reputation as a fierce leader to maintain order and control. He didn't let his soldiers or citizens take advantage of his position. They knew that failure to respect him could lead to harsh consequences. Why fear lasts: the neuropsychological impact. Fear, in contrast to love or affection, lingers in the brain. The psychological foundation of this lies in how our brain processes different types of emotions. While love and affection can feel fleeting and dependent on external conditions, fear activates the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for processing threats and danger. Once activated, the amygdala engraves these experiences in our memory, creating a long-lasting emotional impact. This means that when people fear the consequences of crossing a powerful individual, they remember the fear long after the incident. In contrast, kindness or affection may be reciprocated in the moment, but when times get tough, those emotions are more easily abandoned. Social psychology supports this view. Studies have shown that negative experiences, such as the fear of punishment, tend to stick in our memory longer than positive experiences, which can be easily forgotten or overshadowed by subsequent events. A relevant example of this dynamic is the story of a well-liked CEO who had a reputation for being caring and approachable. Despite all the goodwill, when the company faced difficult decisions, employees began to take advantage of his generosity. As his kindness went unappreciated and unreciprocated, the company's morale plummeted and productivity dwindled. In contrast, another CEO known for being more reserved and firm faced fewer challenges with employee loyalty, even though they weren't always the most liked figure. Their authority, built on respect and fear, led to a more efficient and controlled environment. The mechanics of fear in leadership. Fear-based leadership is not about cruelty or tyranny, but about understanding how to balance strength with fairness. True power comes from commanding respect, not from trying to win affection. The intelligent leader knows that respect comes from fear of the consequences. But this fear is not irrational or based on cruelty. It is calculated and controlled. One of the key components of effective power is maintaining strategic unpredictability. Machiavelli emphasized this point repeatedly. A leader who is predictable becomes weak because they give their subordinates a chance to anticipate their next move and act accordingly. However, a leader who is unpredictable keeps others on their toes, unable to plan their actions in advance. Historical example. One of the most famous examples of strategic unpredictability is Winston Churchill during World War II. Churchill's leadership was not characterized by pleasing his people. In fact, he often faced intense criticism. However, his decisive actions during the war, particularly in the face of overwhelming odds, commanded respect. His unpredictability in making bold moves against the Nazis made his leadership one of history's most respected. People feared the consequences of not following him, which made his leadership much more effective. Fear as a tool, not a weapon. It's important to distinguish between fear-based respect and irrational hatred. When people fear you, they are less likely to challenge you because they understand that crossing you has consequences. However, if that fear escalates into hatred, it becomes destructive. Leaders who are universally feared often end up isolated and untrusted because they create an atmosphere of hostility and resentment. A master leader understands when to exercise firmness and when to show empathy. They do not become tyrants, but strategically use fear to maintain authority. Why being nice can be dangerous. Machiavelli's perspective on leadership often gets misinterpreted as advocating for tyranny or cruelty. However, what he truly understood was that human nature is fragile, and kindness, while an admirable trait, is inherently vulnerable. People, by and large, are not loyal to kindness. They are loyal to authority, which is often built on the demand for respect. And sometimes, demanding respect means being firm, even feared, rather than simply being liked. The fragility of kindness. To understand why being nice can be dangerous, let's explore what happens when kindness becomes the focal point of your leadership or personal behavior. Think of a manager who prides themselves on being nice. They're the person who always says yes to requests, who wants to be liked, and who avoids confrontation at all costs. In the short term, this seems effective. People may like this manager, and they may even feel comfortable working under them. But over time, this niceness leads to weakness, not only because the manager isn't setting clear boundaries, but also because they aren't demanding respect. Psychological insight. In psychology, this dynamic can be traced to what is called the halo effect, the tendency for people to attribute overall positive traits to someone based on a single quality, such as being nice. At first, being kind can create a positive aura around someone. However, When that kindness is not backed by firm boundaries or a sense of authority, people start to see the individual as too lenient and too forgiving. As a result, they begin to take advantage of this behavior. Employees might test limits, ignore responsibilities, or even push deadlines, confident that the manager will not enforce consequences. When the manager finally tries to assert themselves, the shift is met with resistance because their authority was never rooted in respect, only affection. This scenario illustrates how niceness, while important in building relationships, can create an unstable foundation for leadership. Without respect, authority becomes weak, and without firm boundaries, people become more likely to challenge your decisions. The Titanic: trust in safety, blindness to danger. To understand the dangers of over-relying on kindness and complacency, let's look at one of history's most notorious examples, the Titanic disaster. Leading up to the fateful night of the sinking, many passengers aboard the Titanic felt a deep sense of security. The ship was considered unsinkable, a testament to the power of human ingenuity, and of course the kindness and hospitality extended by the crew and passengers. But there was something else at play. Passengers had dreams about the ship sinking before the event occurred, and yet no one believed it could actually happen. This overconfidence was a direct result of the excessive trust in fate and the illusion of safety that being aboard a luxurious ship provided. The passengers felt comfortable, even loved, by the surroundings, the hospitality, and the promises of an experience like no other. This niceness and sense of security lulled them into a false sense of invincibility. This is where the problem lies. When people are overly comfortable in their safety or kind environment, they become blind to the real dangers around them. They are lulled into thinking that everything will continue to go smoothly, even in the face of warning signs or potential risks. This complacency, this overabundance of love and trust, blinds people to the need for vigilance and action. It is only when disaster strikes that they realize the folly of assuming that kindness and trust are enough to protect them. A reflection on leadership. This story mirrors how leadership functions in modern society. Leaders who focus too heavily on being liked or accommodating to everyone around them may soon find that their position of power becomes weakened. When you lead with the primary goal of pleasing everyone, you inadvertently give up control. You let others dictate your actions and surrender your authority. As a result, the balance of power shifts, and you end up losing respect, the very thing that ensures your success as a leader. Leaders who demand respect and maintain firm boundaries may not be the most liked, but they command authority. Their position is not based on affection or the desire to please everyone, but on a deep understanding that respect must be earned, often through firmness, consistency, and, yes, sometimes fear. In this context, fear doesn't mean cruelty. It means making it clear that certain actions will have consequences that people will remember. It's the kind of fear that ensures you remain in control, that ensures others respect your decisions, even if they don't always like them. The dark side of excessive kindness. One key point that Machiavelli emphasized is that while kindness is not inherently bad, it becomes dangerous when it is misplaced. Excessive kindness often comes at the expense of personal boundaries, and when that happens, people often take advantage of it. Psychological studies, including the work of Robert Cialdini on social influence, highlight how people who appear too agreeable or who constantly prioritize others' needs over their own are often seen as easy targets for exploitation. This is because they are perceived as weak, and weakness is something people instinctively try to exploit. An example from folklore offers a perfect illustration. Consider the story of the kind-hearted fool, a person who gives away their possessions, shares too freely, or helps everyone around them but ends up taken advantage of. This archetype exists in cultures worldwide, from ancient fables to modern parables. The lesson is universal. Excessive kindness without boundaries is a form of self-sabotage. Psychological insights on power dynamics. To further understand why kindness can be dangerous, it's important to look at how power dynamics play out in our psychology. Social psychologists, such as Philip Zimbardo, have extensively studied how power and authority shape human behavior. In his famous Stanford prison experiment, Zimbardo demonstrated how people in positions of authority could easily exploit their power over others, while those who were in lower status positions became passive or compliant. This effect is driven by psychological conditioning. Those in power are able to control others by setting boundaries, making sure that people know the consequences of defying them. This is how fear operates on a psychological level. It's not about punishment, but about setting a clear line that is not to be crossed. The fear of losing control. The real danger of kindness is not in the kindness itself, but in what it allows others to do to you. When you consistently prioritize others' desires over your own, you risk losing control of your situation. Just like the manager who seeks to please everyone, or the Titanic passengers who trusted in the safety of the ship, you may end up in a situation where you cannot assert yourself when it matters the most. In the world of power dynamics, it is crucial to understand the nature of fear. Fear is not always negative. It can be a catalyst for respect. Machiavelli advocated for the strategic use of fear in leadership because it ensures that others know their place. It prevents the kind of complacency that comes from thinking everything is safe. People fear consequences, not the leader's kindness. The fear of consequences ensures that they respect you, even when they don't like you. This kind of respect is far more durable than affection. True power comes from the balance of firmness and kindness, understanding when to show strength and when to show empathy. The Machiavellian balance, fear without hatred. Machiavelli's ideas often get misconstrued as advocating for tyranny, cruelty, and absolute power. However, his principle was not about ruling with an iron fist for the sake of oppression, but rather understanding the human need for respect, which is often best achieved through controlled fear. This form of fear, when managed wisely, does not lead to hatred or resentment, but rather to a loyalty that ensures a leader's authority remains unquestioned. Fear versus hatred. Machiavelli argued that the key to power is knowing how to balance fear without crossing into cruelty or hatred. This concept comes down to understanding that fear alone can be an effective tool for ensuring compliance and respect, but hatred creates division and irreconcilable enemies. Fear, when appropriately managed, maintains order without sparking rebellion or revolt. Cruelty, on the other hand, breeds hatred, which can lead to the eventual downfall of a leader. For instance, consider a coach in a sports team. A coach who is feared for their strictness may not be the most popular person among the players, but their authority is respected. Players know that the coach will not tolerate underperformance, and the consequences of failing to meet expectations are severe, whether that's a spot on the bench or worse, being kicked off the team entirely. The fear of these consequences drives the players to give their best effort, even if they don't personally like the coach. This example aligns with Machiavelli's idea that fear must be carefully crafted to avoid overstepping into cruelty, which can lead to rebellion and resentment. The respect that comes from a well-placed fear is solid and reliable, unlike the fleeting admiration that can come from kindness or over-appeasing behavior. The case of Alexander the Great. Perhaps one of the most striking examples of Machiavelli's principle in action is the life and leadership of Alexander the Great. Known for his brutal military tactics and uncompromising nature, Alexander was not loved by all, but he earned the loyalty and respect of his soldiers through his iron-fisted leadership. His soldiers feared his wrath, and they knew that failure in his ranks carried consequences far more severe than simple disappointment. Take, for instance, the famous Battle of Gaugamela, where Alexander's forces faced off against the Persians. Before the battle, Alexander's soldiers were highly motivated and determined to succeed, not because they loved him, but because they feared the repercussions of not doing so. Failure in battle in Alexander's camp was seen as unforgivable, and he had a history of demanding the highest levels of performance. The consequences of failure were direct and tangible: death, disgrace, and punishment. That kind of fear, while not driven by cruelty alone, ensured the soldiers stayed loyal to Alexander and worked together as one cohesive unit. This loyalty is what made Alexander invincible. It wasn't the fleeting affection he received from his soldiers, but their fear and respect for his leadership. Alexander's reign was built on the principle of ensuring that his soldiers respected him, out of fear of what would happen if they didn't meet his expectations. His uncompromising nature was not designed to alienate his men, but to ensure that they gave their best effort at all times, because they feared the consequences of failure far more than they feared his harshness. The psychological theory of fear and authority. The psychological explanation behind this concept can be tied to social psychology and the need for dominance. When we observe human behavior in various settings, there is a clear pattern. People often respect authority because they fear the loss of status, position, or benefits. In Stanley Milgram's famous experiment on obedience, participants were willing to deliver what they believed were painful electric shocks to others, simply because an authority figure told them to do so. While this study was designed to explore obedience to authority, it also demonstrated that fear of punishment or consequences is a powerful motivator in guiding behavior. This principle aligns with Machiavelli's notion that a leader should create an environment of controlled fear. The use of authority in this context isn't about instilling terror or cruelty, but rather about ensuring that people respect the authority that governs them. This psychological concept plays out time and time again, both in history and in daily life. People obey not because they are always motivated by kindness or love, but because they fear the consequences of defying authority, balancing fear with respect. The key takeaway from Machiavelli's insights is that a successful leader knows how to balance fear with respect. It's not about being unreasonably cruel or excessively harsh, but rather about maintaining an aura of authority that ensures people understand the consequences of stepping out of line. Fear, when used sparingly, creates long-lasting respect, the kind that people carry with them even in your absence. However, there is a delicate line to walk. As mentioned earlier, too much fear can breed hatred. Cruelty, if unchecked, can transform that fear into hatred, which undermines your leadership and makes you vulnerable to attack. Leaders like Stalin and Hitler used excessive cruelty, and while they initially achieved power, their brutality ultimately led to resistance and rebellion. These leaders failed to understand the balance between fear and respect, and in doing so, they fostered an environment where hatred grew and undermined their authority. In contrast, leaders like Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill, who are remembered for their wisdom and decisiveness, demonstrated that firmness and respect without excessive cruelty can foster lasting loyalty. Their leadership wasn't about constant threats of violence, but about clear boundaries and uncompromising standards. They understood that fear, when used strategically, could support their authority without crossing into the realm of cruelty or tyranny. This allowed them to maintain control while still earning the respect and trust of those they led. The illusion of loyalty. Loyalty is often considered one of the highest virtues. It is something we strive for in our relationships, careers, and personal lives. However, there's a critical truth that many fail to acknowledge. Loyalty is not unconditional. It is conditional and often only lasts as long as it benefits the individual offering it. People may outwardly express loyalty, but when situations change, when personal interests or opportunities for gain arise, loyalty is often the first thing to shift. Loyalty's fragility. Take, for example, a company where a manager has a reputation for being excessively indulgent. This manager may try to foster goodwill by never enforcing consequences for tardiness, poor performance, or failure to meet expectations. Initially, employees appreciate the relaxed environment and may even express a certain level of loyalty. However, when it comes time to make tough decisions, or when deadlines start piling up, some employees begin to take advantage of this goodwill. They ignore deadlines, cut corners, and undermine the manager's authority, knowing that there will be no serious repercussions. This shift occurs because the manager's kindness is seen as weakness. The lack of firm boundaries leads to complacency, and employees are no longer invested in the organization's goals, but in their own personal comfort. In this scenario, loyalty isn't really loyalty at all. It's a facade built on the manager's inability to assert authority, and the moment personal convenience or advantage becomes apparent, loyalty evaporates. This is an example of how conditional loyalty works in real life. People can feign loyalty for as long as it serves their needs, but when the stakes rise, When the situation changes, their loyalty will falter. Historical example: Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal. History provides numerous examples of how loyalty can quickly disintegrate when self-interest comes into play. One of the most notable examples is the downfall of President Richard Nixon during the Watergate scandal. Nixon, throughout his political career, built long-term alliances and trusted relationships with many in his inner circle. However, when the political pressure from the Watergate break-in scandal mounted and things began to look bleak for his administration, those who had once sworn loyalty to him quickly turned on him. Nixon's loyal advisors and allies, who had once been committed to his cause, ultimately betrayed him in his hour of need. Their loyalty crumbled not because Nixon was incapable of commanding respect, but because the relationship was based on mutual benefit, and once that benefit was threatened, their loyalty disappeared. This was the tragic flaw in Nixon's leadership. He failed to understand the nature of loyalty. Kindness, while a valued trait, became perceived as weakness. Nixon's inability to impose the necessary authority in times of crisis led to the disintegration of his most trusted relationships. His allies did not continue to stand by him when things got difficult. When their own survival or personal interests were threatened, they turned against him, contributing to his downfall. The ultimate lesson from Nixon's presidency is clear. Loyalty, when not backed by authority or consequence, is fragile. People will remain loyal as long as their self-interest is aligned with the person they claim to be loyal to. But the moment their own well-being or advancement is jeopardized, loyalty will often shift. Psychological insights: the nature of loyalty. From a psychological standpoint, loyalty is often rooted in reciprocal benefits. Robert Cialdini, a prominent psychologist and author of Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, explored the concept of reciprocity, the idea that people are motivated to return favors or support when they feel they have received something from others. This exchange can create the illusion of loyalty, but the truth is that it's really just a transaction of give and take. When the balance shifts, when the personal benefits are no longer there, loyalty falters. Additionally, cognitive dissonance plays a role in loyalty. People want to believe that their relationships, whether professional or personal, are built on mutual respect and commitment. When faced with a betrayal or when their loyalty is tested, individuals often experience a conflict between their beliefs and their actions. To reduce this discomfort, they might rationalize their behavior or justify their actions in order to maintain consistency with their self-image. This can lead to a situation where loyalty, while seemingly intact, is actually based on flawed perceptions or self-deception. The paradox of leadership, the limits of kindness. What this all points to is a paradox of leadership. Kindness and warmth are not enough to secure true loyalty. Firmness and clear boundaries are essential. Leaders who are too accommodating or overly generous in their kindness can create an environment where loyalty is based on convenience, not respect. As soon as the situation changes or personal interests are at stake, this type of loyalty can disappear, leaving the leader vulnerable. The key is to balance kindness with authority. Kindness should not be seen as a weakness. However, it should not be the sole basis for building trust. Loyalty needs to be earned through consistent behavior and firm decision-making. When a leader can combine empathy with clear, firm boundaries, the loyalty they receive is rooted in respect rather than mere convenience. Real-world example: leaders who mastered loyalty. One modern example of a leader who understood the fragile nature of loyalty and avoided the pitfalls of blind kindness is Steve Jobs, the co-founder of Apple. Jobs was known for being demanding and at times even harsh with his employees. However, his employees stayed fiercely loyal to him. Why? Because Jobs was relentless in his pursuit of excellence, and he demanded that everyone around him match that level of commitment. He wasn't afraid to challenge those closest to him, and that made his expectations clear. Loyalty wasn't about blind obedience, it was about a shared commitment to the company's vision and values. Although his leadership style was sometimes seen as cold, his ability to hold people accountable while inspiring them with his vision created a loyalty that didn't depend on constant kindness or pleasing behavior. This loyalty was built on mutual respect for his leadership and the understanding that the success of the company and the personal success of his employees were intertwined. Loneliness at the top, the price of power. Power is often romanticized in popular culture, seen as a mark of success, influence, and control. But beneath the surface, the reality of power is often far from glamorous. The higher you rise, the more you realize that real power is inherently isolating. While you may have more influence, wealth, and status, you may also find yourself increasingly alone, as fewer people can relate to the pressures and responsibilities that come with leadership. The isolation of power. At the core of this isolation is a deep psychological shift. As you ascend the ranks, those who don't share your experiences begin to either resent or envy your success. Leaders often find themselves surrounded by people who no longer see them as equals, but as symbols of something they either wish to attain or secretly despise. This dynamic leads to a disconnect between the leader and those around them. For example, imagine the CEO of a thriving tech company. As the business grows, so does the responsibility. Despite having a team of talented individuals at their disposal, the CEO often finds themselves isolated. Those who work for them may view the CEO's decisions with resentment, questioning their choices, or criticizing their leadership. On the flip side, the CEO may struggle with trust issues, unsure of whom to rely on. This creates a chronic sense of loneliness, even in the midst of a bustling, successful organization. Historical example: Napoleon Bonaparte. One of the most famous examples of the loneliness that accompanies power can be found in the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. As a military strategist and ruler of France, Napoleon achieved incredible success. He was one of the most brilliant military minds in history, orchestrating victories that shaped Europe. However, as he rose to the heights of power, he became more and more isolated. His decisions, no matter how well thought out, were made in solitude. Few could understand the immense pressure he was under or the complexity of the decisions he had to make. Even his closest advisors, who once shared in his vision and ambition, began to distance themselves as the years passed. This is a pattern that often occurs when a person reaches the highest levels of power. There are fewer people who can truly empathize with their struggles, leading to a growing sense of isolation. In fact, Napoleon's later years are marked by his intense loneliness. While he had legions of followers, the distance between him and those around him grew wider. His absolute power created an environment where only those who were deeply loyal, or perhaps manipulative, remained by his side. The same dynamic is seen in other historical figures. Power isolates because it creates a gap between the leader and those who do not share the same burdens. Modern example: Steve Jobs. In modern times, the same isolation is seen in figures like Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple. Jobs, despite being surrounded by some of the brightest minds in the tech industry, was often described as difficult and solitary. His vision for Apple was revolutionary, but it came at a personal cost. The deeper Jobs went into his vision for the company, the more isolated he became from those around him. Jobs' management style was often intense, and he could be uncompromising. His drive for perfection and his passion for innovation led him to make decisions that others often couldn't understand. And this alienated him from his colleagues. While his vision was transformative, it often created tension and resentment within his company. As Apple grew into the powerhouse it is today, Jobs was both revered and feared, but the cost was a sense of isolation that few could understand. Even his close colleagues, like Jonathan Ive or Tim Cook, who went on to lead Apple after Jobs' death, would have their own challenges in stepping into the leadership void that Jobs left. Their struggles to maintain the culture Jobs created show that the very weight of power that Steve Jobs carried is not something easily shared. The necessity of loneliness for rational decision-making. This loneliness, while painful, is necessary for clear and rational decision-making. It is through solitude that the leader can reflect on the complexities of their role without the emotional burden of trying to please everyone. The isolation allows for a level of objectivity that is difficult to maintain when constantly surrounded by others' opinions and desires. The emotional distance from those around them allows leaders to make decisions that are best for the long-term success of the organization, rather than succumbing to short-term pressures or popularity contests. A leader who is constantly trying to keep everyone happy is often paralyzed by indecision and manipulated by those around them. The loneliness at the top, while difficult, becomes a tool for making decisions that are unbiased and strategic. This is not to say that leaders should become emotionally disconnected or disregard the well-being of those around them, but the ability to make difficult decisions and set boundaries is critical. As leaders rise, they must learn to balance their empathy with detachment, recognizing that true power is not about popularity, but about the ability to make hard calls for the greater good. The price of true power. Ultimately, power comes with a price: loneliness. The higher you rise, the more isolated you become from those around you. The isolation doesn't stem from a lack of people, but from the disconnect between your experiences and theirs. As you climb the ladder of success, you will encounter fewer individuals who can truly understand your struggles or decisions, and this can create a sense of alienation. But this is also the essence of power. The price of being at the top is the solitude that comes with being surrounded by others who cannot fully grasp what you face. For some, this loneliness is a source of sadness or regret. For others, it is a sign of the clarity and strength that comes from being able to make decisions without being swayed by emotional attachments. In the end, power is a balancing act. To maintain it, you must understand that the loneliness of leadership is not a weakness. It is a necessary byproduct of holding the weight of responsibility. And for those who are truly committed to their path, that isolation will become a part of the journey, one that ultimately refines their ability to lead with clarity and purpose. The final power is an illusion. Machiavelli's most shocking idea is that power is an illusion. A ruler is only as powerful as their people believe they are. A CEO is only powerful as long as the board and employees believe in their authority. A king's power is only as valid as long as his subjects agree that he is the ruler. Power is a social contract, a mutual agreement. If that agreement breaks down, so does power. This is why power requires constant maintenance. You must keep people believing in your authority. The moment they stop believing, you lose control. Final thoughts. In conclusion, leadership and power are far more complex than just kindness or love. They hinge on a strategic balance between respect and fear, the understanding that loyalty is conditional, and the need for calculated unpredictability. True power comes from recognizing human nature and using it to your advantage, while never crossing the line into tyranny. True leaders are not defined by how much they are loved, but by how much they are respected. And the respect born from fear is more enduring than fleeting admiration. If you want to lead successfully, remember this: master the art of controlling fear, managing loyalty, and maintaining authority with dignity and wisdom. True greatness does not lie in always being right. It lies in strategically moving forward when the world around you expects you to fall. Resilience in the face of adversity, rather than consistency, is the hallmark of the great leaders in history. So ask yourself, do you want to be loved or do you want to be respected?